On a cold, silent night in the diner, Marcus Thompson wiped down the last table, never imagining his entire life was about to shift. A billionaire woman had just walked out, leaving him nothing but a $0 tip and a single folded note hidden beneath her empty plate. The moment he opened it, his hands trembled. This wasn't charity. It wasn't a mistake. It was something far more dangerous, and it had everything to do with him being a black single father just trying to survive. So why did a billionaire seek him out, and what did she really want? Comment and tell us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more stories. Before that strange note ever appeared under a diner plate, Marcus Thompson lived a life built on quiet endurance. Every evening, while the city wound down, he stepped into the fluorescent glow of the Golden Oak Diner, tying on the same worn apron he'd relied on for years. To customers, he was just another waiter, quick with a smile, steady with a refill, invisible in all the ways people assume a black man in a low-wage job should be. But behind that smile was a single father carrying more weight than anyone could see. Marcus had once imagined a different future, one with a stable tech job, weekends free, and bedtime stories read without guilt. But life had shifted the moment he lost the woman he loved. From that day on, every decision revolved around his daughter, Aaliyah. Morning routines, school drop-offs, late-night shifts, everything was shaped by the quiet promise he made to her mother. Give her a life she could be proud of. Still, the world around him rarely made that easy. Some customers barely acknowledged him. Others offered polite smiles that disappeared the second he turned his back. And every now and then, he felt that familiar sting, subtle looks, dismissive tones, the quiet reminders that being a black man in America meant working twice as hard to be seen as half as worthy. But Marcus never complained. He didn't have the luxury. Every tip mattered. Every shift mattered. Every night he missed dinner with Aaliyah cut deeper than he ever admitted. Yet on this particular night, something felt different. Not because the diner was busier or the rain heavier, but because a woman who didn't belong in a place like this was watching him far too closely. Her presence unsettled him, though he couldn't explain why. He didn't know it yet, but everything in his life was about to shift, because some notes aren't meant to be read. They're meant to open doors people like him were never invited through. As the night wore on, the diner settled into its familiar rhythm, but Marcus felt a quiet unease threading through each moment. The wealthy woman in the corner, Madeline Cooper, had hardly touched her pie, barely sipped her coffee, yet never stopped observing him. Every gesture he made, every tired smile, every small act of kindness toward the people around him seemed to register in her gaze. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't judgment. It was something colder, sharper, as though she was measuring him for a purpose he didn't understand. Still, Marcus kept moving. The rain outside hammered the windows, and the regulars trickled in one by one. He cleaned counters, refilled cups, and helped a struggling college student pay for her meal. He did all the things he always did, but the weight of unseen eyes shadowed every step. And deep inside, he sensed that people like Madeline Cooper didn't sit in diners at midnight without reason. When her bill came, she signed it without hesitation, yet left nothing in return. No tip, no acknowledgement of his service. Just an empty space that echoed the way society often saw him, present, useful, but ultimately disposable. Marcus had experienced that kind of dismissal before. A black man in a service apron wasn't expected to deserve more. But the envelope beneath her plate changed everything. The moment Marcus unfolded the note, that ordinary night cracked open. The message inside wasn't gratitude, apology, or even insult. It was an invitation, a demand, a summons from a billionaire who should have had no reason to know he existed, let alone call him to one of the most powerful corporate towers in the city. Through the rest of his shift, the note burned in his pocket like a warning. He tried to ignore it, but each time he thought of Aaliyah sleeping at home, he felt the sting of reality. He was barely holding on. Tuition notices, overdue bills, worn-out clothes, all the quiet burdens of a single black father trying to survive in a world that stacked odds against him from the start. Still, billionaires didn't help people like him. They observed, judged, and walked away untouched. The idea that this woman could change anything for him felt impossible. And yet, the more he tried to dismiss it, the more the question gnawed at him. Why him? Why that note? Why now? When he returned home, exhaustion clung to him like a second skin. Aaliyah was asleep, curled into her blankets with the innocence only children could keep. As he watched her breathe softly, Marcus felt the crushing pull of responsibility. He wanted more for her, something beyond the weight of racial assumptions, beyond the limits placed on families like theirs. But hope was a dangerous thing for a man in his position. Hope could be a trap. Sleep didn't come. His mind replayed every detail of the woman's expression, every moment her eyes lingered on him, every reminder of how the world had taught him to be cautious around power. Yet caution didn't solve anything. His daughter's future depended on more than long shifts and scraped-together tips. By morning, the decision felt less like a choice and more like a step he had no option but to take. He walked into Sterling Industries with the dread of a man entering a world that wasn't made for him. The polished marble floors reflected back someone the building wasn't designed to welcome. A black single father in an old suit, carrying worn-out hope in the seams of his pockets. What he didn't know was that the real test had only begun, and the stakes would rise far beyond anything he imagined. Standing in the polished boardroom high above the city, Marcus felt the sharp divide between his world and theirs more deeply than ever. Walls of glass framed a skyline built by power, money, and influence, none of which had ever been within his reach. Yet here he stood, a black single father in a worn suit, facing a room full of executives who looked at him not with respect, but with suspicion. Whispers slipped through the air, subtle glances exchanged, as if his very presence disrupted the order they expected. He wasn't meant to be here. Their eyes said it. Their silence said it louder. Moments earlier, he had learned the truth. The program he had poured himself into, the one meant to support families like his, was on the verge of being dismantled. Numbers, budgets, and lack of alignment had become the board's excuses. But beneath their polished reasoning lay something deeper, something colder. Marcus knew that when people in power felt uncomfortable with a voice that didn't fit their mold, they found ways to silence it. And today, that voice was his. As he stood before them, he felt the weight of generations pressing on his shoulders. His mother's sacrifices, his grandmother's warnings, the countless moments in his own life when he had been underestimated, dismissed, or quietly pushed aside. Every one of those memories gathered inside him now, not as pain, but as fuel. He stepped forward. The room went still. Marcus spoke with a calmness that came from years of swallowing his frustration. He talked about families who had never been given a real chance, about workers who labored in the shadows of systems never designed for them. He explained what dignity meant when the world tried to take it from you, and what hope meant when racism carved invisible barriers into everyday life. And for the first time they listened, not because they wanted to, but because his courage left no space for retreat. Yet the real turning point wasn't the board, it was Marcus himself. This was the moment he realized he didn't need their approval, their comfort, or their permission. He wasn't fighting for himself anymore. He was standing for people who had been told their whole lives to stay quiet, stay grateful, stay small. His voice grew stronger, steadier, unshakable. When he finished, the room held its breath. Some faces softened, others hardened, but the truth hung between them, undeniable and heavy. Marcus had laid everything bare, his job, his future, his standing. If they took it all away, he would walk out of this glass tower with nothing but integrity. And yet, for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel afraid. Because this moment wasn't about losing something. It was about reclaiming something that had always belonged to him. The room finally shifted, but whether in his favor or against him, he couldn't yet tell. And that uncertainty was the sharpest cliff he had ever stood on. In the days that followed that tense boardroom confrontation, Marcus discovered something he never expected. The program he fought for, one built to uplift families like his, wasn't just saved, it grew. The resistance that once rose against him softened, and new voices began to echo the truth he had spoken out loud. Change didn't come easily, and it didn't come overnight. But it came because he refused to back down in a room where he was never meant to stand in the first place. And for Marcus, the impact reached far beyond corporate walls. Back home, Aaliyah saw a father who came home in time for dinner, who carried himself with a strength she didn't fully understand yet, but felt deeply. She saw a black man who pushed through barriers built long before he was born, a reminder that dignity can survive even in the spaces where the world tries to shrink it. Marcus continued his work not because it brought him status, but because it finally allowed him to transform the very system that once ignored him. One family at a time, he saw lives change, parents finding stability, children finding confidence, communities finding hope. And with each person helped, he stitched together a future he once feared would never belong to people like him. Yet the truth of his journey lingered. His struggle wasn't unique. The bias he faced in silent glances, closed doors, and unspoken assumptions was part of a much larger story, one that millions of black families endure every single day. Marcus's victory didn't erase the injustice, but it proved something powerful, that when someone who's been overlooked finally takes up space, the world is forced to see what it tried so long to ignore. In the end, his story became more than a note under a plate. It became a reminder that change doesn't start with power, it starts with courage. And it leaves us with a question that cannot be ignored. How many more voices like Marcus must rise before the world finally chooses to listen? If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Black Community Struggles for more powerful stories about justice, truth, and our community's fight to be seen.